Good morning to everyone and welcome to this interactive webinar. Before starting, as you can see, we are in meeting mode and this session is recorded, but I will only share the theoretical part to the participants. So during the game, feel free to express and to interact. It will be recorded but not shared to the Shift network. Do not hesitate to use the chat during the presentation to ask all your questions, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. This session around risk management is part of our Redefining Value program that has for goal to improve decision-making and external disclosure for a better economy and world, and building resilience through applying risk management to ESG-related risks, especially with post-pandemic challenges, is part of this exercise, of course. This session is organized jointly with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, so-called WBCSD, from whom the Shift is the national point of contact. And for the records, the WBCSD is a CEO lead organization of over 200 leading businesses working together to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. Today, we have the chance to have two people from the organization who will conduct this meeting. It's Eleanor Leach, you can see with pink background. Yeah, hi Eleanor, and Gordon Darling. I will let them introduce themselves, but already I would like to thank them very much to be here today. In November 2019, Eleanor and Gordon already came in Brussels to conduct a session around the topics. It was a great success, and we thought it will be interesting to replan one, unfortunately online, with an accent on what we are living today due to the COVID crisis since more than 1 year. Gordon, I give you the floor. Thank you very much to be here today. To the audience, please do not hesitate to interact during the game. You will see we will try to play a game online, but our feedback and reaction is very useful. So thank you very much.
Hello, good morning, everybody, and thanks for having us, Eglantine. As you said, Eleanor and I were in Brussels a year past November, so November 2019, and we thoroughly enjoyed the session there. There's a lot happened since then for us all on a personal level and on a business level as well. Very different modes of working, so it's great to catch up again, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to catch up in the future face to face in the way that we used to. So but I hope you're all well, and I say it's a delight to be here. In this short session, we're going to talk about applying ESG risk management techniques to environmental, social and governance related risks, and provide some perspectives on some of the post-pandemic challenges, or maybe post is too early, but the pandemic experience and considerations around risk and ESG focus. In relation to the agenda, we'll briefly introduce WBCSD. Eglantine's already mentioned a little about it, so we'll skip through that quite quickly. We'll talk about why should ESG matter to your business, give some perspectives on the current ESG landscape, and then Eleanor will provide, who will introduce herself shortly. She'll provide an overview of the WBCSD and COSO guidance that we've been supporting our members in the application of its app to ESG related risks. So guidance we developed in conjunction with partners. So we'll talk about that for a little bit. We'll then talk a little bit about some aspects of that, and then we'll play the resilience game. And then I'll finish with having some perspectives on how ESG risk assessment has been informed by the pandemic and aspects of activity in that space that you might want to consider to improve your ESG risk assessment. As Eglantine said, please do participate. We're keen for you to speak up. We're keen for you to obviously listen, but to contribute and participate, and and to enjoy the session, and particularly through the game part of the session, having you willing to take on some roles, and it's nothing too onerous. It's nothing that's going to expose you, but also hearing your opinions and also actively voting is really useful to us. So with that, we'll move on, but I hope you enjoy the session, have fun, and I'll tell you a little bit briefly about WBCSD. So as Eglantine said, we are a CEO-led organisation of approximately 200 businesses who are working together in a pre-competitive space to help develop solutions to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. So we're global, we're CEO-led, we're market-driven, and with a vision that we want to support the creation of a world where more than 9 billion people are living well within the boundaries of our planet by 2050. We're organised into 6 work programmes that you can see on the screen here. These are these obviously have particular focus on their areas, but within this, across the centre of them, or within the centre of them, is the Redefining Value programme, which cuts across the programmes and cuts across sectors. So as our colleagues in the different programmes are targeting the realisation of the sustainable development goals, we're supporting that through the creation of our solutions, through collaboration with our members. In particular, we're looking at helping internal decision making, so bringing ESG awareness into internal decision making. And you can see some of the activities that we're undertaking in the top of this slide. In particular, we are undertaking in my space, which is the enterprise risk management space, the implementation of workshops and for companies around our risk guidance, looking at enhanced risk assessment techniques. And Eleanor's also heavily involved in the sort of governance and board director ESG resources and workshops, which are clearly tied into the risk assessment and risk management activities. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But before we do that, we'd just like to hear a little bit about yourselves by going through a poll and understand a bit more about the audience that we have today. So if you could go to your mobile, your laptop, or your iPad and log on to www.menti.com and type in this code, we will shortly be, we'll have some questions that will appear on your screen, and we will see on my screen in a moment the responses to that. So just bear with me, I just need to share my alternative screen. So yeah, so the question is, in which sector or industry does your organisation operate? And so we're seeing a few quite varied already. So education, pharmaceutical, consulting, couple in education, couple in pharma. So we've got a diverse range of sectors being covered here. I can scroll this down and you can see, so multiple sectors. Interior design, interesting, that one as well. Another in consulting, so a few consulting, financial services, so a fair range here. And I think that's we were speaking with Eglantine, we were expecting quite a range of different sectors to be covered. So it's great we've got that representation. So I'll just give it a more than 19 voted. So no others coming in now. So if we could just click on to the next question. And then within your organisation, which function do you work in is the next question. So you should refresh on your screen. And then so a large influence of sustainability, not surprisingly, some in risk management, a couple in human resources, what we've found is that particularly when we do these at workshops at organisational level, we do have a very diverse range of attendance. So we will, and it's also, we find that's really helpful because we get a range of perspectives and you understand the integration and consistency of awareness of risk and sustainability when you have the diversity of attendance. So that's great. I mean, we might explore later where, there's a sizable number relative to the size in the other space. So we might explore where you're working later, and I'm sure your insight and experience will be useful as well. Now, I think we have one more, which is what ESG-related risks are you most concerned about? So what for you as personally, or you professionally, your organisation, what are the ESG-related risks that that you keep you awake at night? So obviously we've seen a lot around recently over the years around climate change, but increasingly we're seeing social risks, human rights, diversity, inclusion, for example, as significant risks of focus and concern. Biodiversity as well being mentioned. Climate change, of course, featuring high. Equality, acceptability, inclusion. So, yes, and I'd say for a long time, climate change was very much the main focus, and of course it is a critically important focus. But it's been interesting to watch over the last couple of years just how other areas of focus of such as human rights, such as social risks, have really come to the fore, and the S of ESG has become a critical area of focus. So thanks very much for that. I will flick back to my presentation. For some reason, I seem to go back to the start. There we go. There we go. So I'm going to briefly talk about our business case for better ESG risk management, so applying risk management techniques within the ESG space. Our background to this has really been that we at WBCSD recognise that the financial system is actually very good at doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to allocate capital from A to B, but it doesn't focus on wider sustainability capitals or issues. It thinks very much around in a regulated system. It looks at historical performance. It looks at very clearly defined legal boundaries and geographical boundaries. Whereas the sustainability system doesn't address isn't set up like that. It's thinking longer term. It has things beyond boundaries. It's not highly regulated. Or hasn't to date been highly regulated. It's not well understood or consistently understood, and it's emerging. Whereas the financial system is very, very founded on well understood regulation. And so what we are noting was that the signals and understanding of the sustainability system weren't getting through to the decision makers within the financial system. And so our focus of our work has been in really trying to help that information to flow, to have risk, sustainability working together and collaborating effectively within organizations and beyond. What we've seen is a changing business context as well over the last 15 years. And on the left-hand side of this graph, we'll see that's the colourful schematic of the top 5 global risks from the World Economic Forum report, year on year since 2007. And I'm not going to go through this in any detail, other than to highlight that clearly there's been a change in colour. and we've moved increasingly towards the blue, which was really looking at the bottom in 2007 and the post and 8-9 and the post-credit crunch and financial crisis around economic and financial focus risks, to the greens and reds, which are societal and environmental, or the ambers and geopolitical risks in more recent years. So we've seen this steady transition into with ESG risks as being the top risks in terms of impact or likelihood as assessed by the Global World Economic Forum. And at the same time, we've seen the emergence of increasingly varied stakeholders and factors for organizations to think about when they're undertaking the risk management, when they're undertaking the risk reporting and disclosure. So thinking about megatrends and disruptions and the changing global risk landscape and future growth pathways for organizations due to urbanization, due to changing macroeconomic landscape and shifts in macroeconomic power. Thinking about climate change, biodiversity loss. And against that, I say we have investors wanting more data on each company's ESG performance. We've got employees and customers demanding more transparency around companies' performance, practices, products. And we've increasingly got regulators emerging and standardization of processes being demanded, and active NGOs and communities increasing pressure for radical transparency and change. So we have this changed business context, which has got this increasing focus on ESG-related factors as critical to business performance and business reporting and demonstration of their commitments. We've also got management within companies who are increasingly showing a need for information around ESG performance and about risks to their business across a whole range of topics, but also demonstrating that they maybe don't feel comfortable around the level of and quality of information and data that they receive. And this is information from the PwC CEO survey conducted in 2020, looking at the gap between data considered critical and important for decision making and the comprehensiveness of that data as currently received in relation to how the CEO perceives that data. And I've highlighted the gap here in terms of the data about which risks to the business is exposed as an area where the CEOs feel that they lack appropriate data. So there's this data gap to bridge, and I think we've seen some of that around some advances in that through the pandemic. But we've also seen where organizations have shown agility and responsiveness, but also in the longer term, what are the strategic solutions that will help close this gap? Other areas where we've highlighted the need for greater awareness of risk management and application of risk management in the ESG context have been, for example, in the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and their recommendations and requirements for businesses to report on the resilience of their strategy and the integration of risk management and climate reporting capabilities. And so we've seen in their 2020 status report, the areas that were lagging furthest behind against their recommendations were the resilience of strategy and the integration of overall risk management. So again, this is a sign that while organizations might be focused and willing, they're finding some practical challenges around how they undertake the activities that they need to in these spaces. We conducted our own analysis as well within WBCSD, and we do this on a yearly basis around the alignment of ESG and risk factors. So we look at the alignment between factors that are reported in annual risk filings and their appearance as material topics in sustainability reports. So we look at the sustainability reports and we say, where do we see these reflected in the annual risk filings? And we've been conducting this over the past 4 years. We're actually in the midst of doing the 2020 analysis, reporting season analysis now. But what we see is typically marginally increasing, but still low levels of alignment. So factors that are appearing in the as material in sustainability reports, only 44% of them are we seeing an average from the 2019 reporting season as being reflected in the risk filings. And we see a very small number of companies that will have full alignment, and a significant number, a quarter of the companies, we can't see the alignment at all. So there might be good reasons why some factors aren't being reported, but we would expect typically if ESG and ERM were integrated within companies, that level of alignment of material factors to material risks within organizations would be higher. But we've also seen, and this is just the findings split up by sector and by material topics. And so we see, I say generally improving alignment, but in some instances, not always over the years. But some sectors doing better than others, and you can see that the leaders within this space are in the sectors of personal care, drug and grocery stores, construction materials, and oil and gas. But that's there are various reasons for why these companies are at these levels. But we're also seeing, for example, if you look down the bottom of the table on the left, automobiles and parts was more transparently aligned back in 2017, but there's been a deterioration over the past 3 years. So we're seeing sectoral differences, and obviously we will see company differences within sectors. But if you're interested in this analysis, you can come to our web pages and you can have a look at that there. I just wanted to highlight as well that when we look across material topics on the right-hand side, two highly emergent or highly focused upon areas are currently human rights and society, so social related risks, equality risks, etc. In terms of the reporting within this analysis, we're seeing low levels of alignment relative to the other areas as well, which I think is interesting. It's probably showing the emergence, but not yet the maturity around how companies are addressing these risks. So I'll just briefly give some perspectives on the ESG landscape as well. And this has obviously been highly influenced by the COVID experience, but we're seeing a changing business context, which has been challenging management. So COVID in particular has provided a forced focus on supply chain risks. We're seeing, as I mentioned, kind of diversity, equality, and human rights becoming more prevalent. COVID as well, but more generally, sort of geopolitical. COVID has driven geopolitical considerations, particularly around sort of asynchronous response to the virus and the different stages at which different countries are in terms of its response and capabilities to address the virus. But we are seeing more generally a geopolitical landscape change due to macroeconomic powers and also kind of nationalization and internalization as well. Organizations have changed their operating models. They've had to think about tactical and revived responses to the pandemic, and also to respond to the challenges around supply chains. And we've also got new working practices in place, which have necessitated organizations to think about the risks that they have to address in terms of employee safety, worker welfare, remote working practices, etc. Technology from working from home as well. So this has forced a kind of new risk landscape and a need for risk assurance, revised risk assessments, considering reviewing your risk profiles, and also for their support within organizations to deliver, I say, assurance, internal audit functions, compliance functions, often having to work in new ways and undertake audits and reviews against new practices within the business, with which they don't have long-term experience. So, certainly there's opportunity there for businesses as well, but to roll out to respond to the new demands on data, technology, and infrastructure as well, but needs for support as well. And against this, what I have to say, I won't go through this in any detail, but this is just some quotes that we've seen recently about the widening range of capital and risks that need to be managed. So, we've seen the task force for inequality-related financial disclosures talking about inequality. We've seen the need for companies to think about value and internalize externalities. And so thinking about the company's environmental footprint, its impact in communities, what's happening in the supply chain. We've seen resilience around the supply chain.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, Gordon. Your audio seems to go from very low to very high, and I always
miss
5 seconds of what you say. Maybe it's me, maybe I'm the only one, but
all right, okay. I hadn't noticed that. I'll pull my screen right, and maybe what I can do is put my video off then. Thanks for letting me know that. I can put my video off so you're not seeing right into my face, which is maybe a bit off-putting. But is that any better? Pull my screen.
I haven't noticed the volume going down since I made my intervention, so maybe it's magic. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you're the magician that made it work. Okay, so thanks for letting me know, and say do shout out if there's anything you need to tell me. That the volume's an issue. So 1 second, I'm just getting myself in here. And then against that backdrop, we're seeing, and Eleanor will touch on this as well. We're seeing the scrutiny of business across its purpose, across its duties to comply in relation to reporting and disclosure requirements, against legal and compliance considerations. And we were certainly seeing, particularly in the States, but also elsewhere, ESG-focused litigation being used as a tool and therefore emerging as a significant risk that organizations need to think about in terms of the commitments and disclosures and the consistency around these and their abilities to attain. And that's an interesting area to explore further in the future, perhaps, as organizations look to be ambitious, but perhaps not overcommit in terms of their statements publicly. And of course, the COVID in particular has shone a light on business vulnerabilities, and therefore the demands on organizations to demonstrate and build resilience capabilities, thinking about crisis management tools, thinking about stress testing their organization and what that means, therefore, to their agility and abilities to respond. What we've seen, and this is just to tell you a little bit about WBCSD, we've seen our members outperform and demonstrate signs of outperforming throughout the COVID crisis. So this is an example of the North American members' performance. And so without going into this in any detail, but we took a group of our members and compared their performance against the S&P 500 and iShares equivalents in the States. And they appeared, and I know it's not, we'll see what the longer term position is, but they appeared to at least weather the initial impacts of COVID more strongly than perhaps others did. And then by comparison in Europe, I think maybe the difference has been slightly less marked, but what we have definitely seen is that organizations, either our members or ESG leaders, organizations categorized as ESG leaders have performed generally that bit more strongly or showed a bit more resilience or less impact on the organization through the COVID crisis as well. So in terms of kind of this overarching message, what we're also seeing is mainstream actors getting much more serious about sustainability reporting. So in particular, you'll be aware of the World Economic Forum reports, I'm sure, around common metrics. So seek to try and standardize and pull together common metrics and measures for reporting to enable some consistency and ultimately some standardization. We've seen the SASB and IRC merger to try, which is also looking to kind of think about different areas of standardization around value creation. We've seen, for example, examples of CDSB potentially looking at social risks and a framework and standardization approach for that as well. But we've also seen a kind of explosion of the ESG reporting landscape. So I think a tenfold growth in the last 20 years around ESG reporting, with over 2,000 plus reporting provisions. So organizations are challenged to navigate that complex landscape as well. So what I would just like to highlight to you is that we have what's called the Reporting Exchange. It's a global resource that is hosted free of charge for use at the WBCSD, which helps organizations look at the reporting requirements and resources and navigate what sustainability information is pertinent to you and provide the evidence base for aligning and corporate reporting in ESG. And so, for example, within Belgium, you could look at the reporting requirements in terms of obligations, in terms of channel disclosure. You can look at how that compares to wider Europe or other countries. And so we have this opportunity to help you navigate. And so I suggest you could look at that as a useful resource. And there are others that we can touch on. And finally, this allows you to kind of think about the breakdown and look at the breakdown in terms of different aspects of the ESG factors within this reporting landscape. So that's a quick overview. I hand over to Eleanor, who's going to provide an overview of WBCSD and COSO's guidance itself.
Thanks, Gordon, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk through the guidance that WBCSD has developed in collaboration with COSO. And Gordon, if you don't mind going to the next slide. In 2017, COSO, which is the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, updated their enterprise risk management framework. You may have been familiar with the 2004 COSO Cube on the left of the slide. And this was updated to form 5 components and is supported by 20 new principles. The updated framework really recognizes the importance of culture and focuses on decision-making, linking to both strategy and performance. And the structure is really designed to follow the business model and emphasize value creation, preservation, and realization. For those of you that are not familiar with COSO, I noticed in the polling that we have quite a lot of attendees from the sustainability function today. COSO is made up of 5 professional associations: the American Accounting Association, the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, AICPA, the Financial Executives International, and the Institution of Management Accountants and the Institute of Internal Auditors. And really their mission is to provide thought leadership through the development of comprehensive frameworks and guidance on enterprise risk management, internal control, and fraud deterrence. And Gordon, if you can go to the next slide, please. So as leaders in their respective fields, WBCSD and COSO entered into a unique partnership back in 2016. And we signed a memorandum of understanding to really demonstrate this importance of integrating ESG-related risks and opportunities into mainstream business practice. And this began by the development of application guidance, which was mapped to the existing COSO framework. Next slide, please, Gordon. The final guidance applying enterprise risk management to ESG-related risks was launched in October 2018. And 1 year later, in 2019, it was awarded the ISAR honours at the 36th meeting of the Intergovernmental Working Group of Experts on International Standards of Accounting and Reporting. And you can see by the graphic on the right here that the guidance has got 5 chapters, which mirror the 5 components of the COSO ERM framework and consider how ESG-related risks can be incorporated and addressed at each stage. Next slide, please. So the guidance is really designed to help companies in a number of different ways, but principally it reinforces the connections between risk management and sustainability by providing a common language. It provides an opportunity to share insights on impacts and dependencies and frame risks in terms of the impact that they have on the business. This is really done to help support long-term viability and resilience as the entities have to adapt and anticipate and respond to this changing business landscape that Gordon's talked us through. It helps individuals to understand the tools and knowledge that risk management can bring to sustainability, and also helps management to understand how they can deploy and develop new and innovative resources as companies respond to these risks. And the next slide, please, Gordon. So as we begin to look at the guidance in a bit more detail, I said it's composed of 5 chapters, and the first is really on governance and culture. The board, we know, has a critical role to play in ensuring that environmental and social considerations are embedded across the organization. And we know that the changing landscapes is demanding that boards are equipped to deal with these shocks as they materialize and ensure resiliency in times of crisis. Now, this includes the knowledge and experience of directors, the relevant and necessary committees that an organization might have at the board level to really address these topics. And where perhaps they don't have the experience or knowledge to address those topics, think about how they could bring in other advisory or members of the board that might be able to support those ideas and understanding. And in some countries, we can still see that governance arrangements are particularly opaque, and there's often a lack of transparency around how decisions are made in the boardroom, particularly when there's no requirement to disclose the information. And we're starting to see as well that managing stakeholder tensions is becoming increasingly important as boards are put in situations where they have to make decisions, which really reinforces the need to take into consideration the impact on all of your key stakeholders as an organization. I'm going to go into governance in a bit more detail once I've gone through the chapters, so I'm going to move on to the second chapter now. And this really focuses on strategy and objective setting. We know that all entities have impacts and dependencies on nature and society, and this is about understanding the business context and how that serves as an anchor to effective risk management. This was an area that COSO particularly focused on when they updated their framework in 2017, and they wanted to emphasize the importance of managing and mitigating risks in the broader business context, and particularly thinking how those risks might impact the achievement of an organization's strategy. This chapter outlines the importance of understanding this interconnected business context, which Gordon's going to talk through a bit later on, and how risk and sustainability functions can really collaborate to support management, the board, but also the organization more broadly to have a really holistic view of the internal and external environment. In understanding this broader environment, there's a need for businesses to take account of a multi-capital approach, and this chapter really draws on the IIRC's view of value creation, which the model on the bottom right of the slide, many of you will be familiar with from a point of view of multi-capital business models. In the next chapter, please, next slide, please, Gordon, sorry. The next chapter is the third chapter and is the largest in the guidance, and it's split into 3 sections. We know that many companies have limited resources and can therefore not respond to all risks equally. So what this chapter has done is to help a company move through the identification, assessment, and prioritization process to ensure that the risks with the greatest magnitude are mitigated in the most effective way. What it seeks to ensure is that ESG-related risks are really considered alongside what we would traditionally consider mainstream risks, such as legal, financial, regulatory, or market risk. And the principles in this chapter are often those that sustainability practitioners we find need the most guidance on, particularly when it comes to quantifying ESG-related risks in a common language and working with the risk management practitioners in the organization to develop innovative responses. By leveraging ESG subject matter expertise from the sustainability function, it's a real opportunity to ensure that these emerging and potentially longer term ESG risks are not ignored or discounted in the process, but are instead assessed and prioritized alongside other risks as well. The fourth chapter discusses reviewing and revising risk management activities to critically evaluate their effectiveness. We know risk management's not a one and done activity. It's a dynamic process that needs continuous evaluation. In many countries, monitoring the effectiveness of the internal control and risk management process is required by regulation. And the process may need to evolve due to changes in the external environment to ensure that businesses are responding effectively. And I think COVID-19 has probably shown that, that many organizations might need to think about this going forward, as Gordon's already said. The final chapter is about information communication and reporting. And for ESG-related risks, it considers how material information is reported and communicated internally and externally to stakeholders through the most appropriate channels to really ensure that they get the information that they require in the most timely and relevant way. And if we think that the primary objective of communication is to provide decision useful information to the right stakeholders, then we need to think about how ESG-related risks are incorporated into that discussion as well. For external reporting, risk management is a regulatory requirement in in many jurisdictions, and the demand for ESG information, as Gordon said, is just continuing to increase. So I think ensuring that you're following a model which is really ensuring that what is material to your business is being disclosed in the most appropriate way is really important, particularly when it comes to risk and opportunity. Next slide, please, Gordon. So to further support our members and our global network partners, as we're doing today, with the implementation of this guidance, we developed a diagnostic tool, which is really designed to help you as a company assess your level of integration of ESG into ERM. It's aligned exactly to the guidance, and it provides a checklist of questions for you to consider as you navigate through the guidance, and to really help you benchmark your own activities on a scale from basic to advanced to help identify areas of future focus. And on to the next slide, please, Gordon. So I think there was a link on that slide, these will be made available, so you'll be able to access that. Gordon, maybe in the interest of time, I might move over this Menti question, as I'm keen for us to get into the game. This was really just about thinking about what are the key stakeholders for your business. But I think given we've got a few sustainability practitioners on the call today, many will be familiar with their stakeholders. But I want to go into governance a little bit more, and also thinking about this, as Gordon said, from the perspective of purpose and also stakeholder engagement. The landscape for governance is changing, and next slide, please, Gordon. Company regulators are calling for change. Over the last few years, we've seen announcements and updates from the Business Roundtable in the United States. We've seen the work by the British Academy on the future of the corporation and their principles for purposeful business, a renewed focus by large investors. We've seen BlackRock's CEO letter, State Street, and others, as well as developments in reporting around. In the UK, we have the Section 172, and the EU also has its Sustainable Corporate Governance Initiative. Next slide, please, Gordon. But why focus on governance? The role and expectation of corporations is changing, and that this means that the role of the board is continuing to evolve. And really, they have a critical role to play in ensuring that ESG considerations are embedded in the organization and in the decision-making process. And the risks that challenge and threaten a company's business model are also changing. So the board needs to ensure that it's resilient to withstand these shocks, and know that the arrangements, I think, as I mentioned, the arrangements in some countries around their governance and disclosure of what is actually discussed during board meetings is often transparent. We hear other things around agenda time being tight for boards, and more things coming onto the agenda, experience, skills, diversity, all those sorts of things also playing a role. Next slide, please, Gordon. So as part of the work at the WBCSD, we've been looking at governance and internal oversight for the last nearly 3 years now. And as part of this work, we interviewed a series of directors to really understand the challenges and barriers for directors when it comes to integrating ESG. And we've noticed that these challenges tend to fall into 5 main groups. These are around the 5 dark blue circles you can see on the screen: the structure, people, process, stakeholders, and reporting. So the first, the structure. Does the board have the mandate to consider sustainability? Is it responsible for that? Does the business purpose incorporate sustainability? And is that then embedded throughout the organization and the decisions actually made taking that purpose into account? Secondly, people. Are the right people on the board? Is the composition right to drive the purpose? Is there training provided where board directors need upskilling or where experience is perhaps lacking? And this could be through, as I said, hiring or external consultants. Thirdly, the process of incorporating ESG. Is risk management aligned with materiality? Does the board agenda dedicate sufficient time to this? And is the board evaluating its progress against its non-financial objectives as well as its financial objectives? Considering stakeholders is necessary to long-term value creation, and boards need to not only consider the views of stakeholders in generating value, but also the impact that those stakeholders have on the business in achieving those objectives as well. And when it comes to reporting performance, the board needs to be confident that its ESG data or its non-financial sustainability data is consistent from one report to another. How's progress measured? Is the right framework being used? Are we sure that there is investment quality, investment grade data in the same way that we would expect with financial data? Next slide, please, Gordon. Now, at risk of going into too much detail here, some of the challenges that we found from those interviews, we pulled together to work through some recommendations for companies and their directors. And this report can be found on our website. And it includes embedding sustainability and purpose, aligning with risk management, education and awareness. And really, These challenges and these recommendations form the 5 pillars for the work that we have developed moving forward. And then the next slide, please, Gordon, to support directors really in the sort of practical integration of this and making sure that things are actionable, because with many of our projects at WBCSD, we start by grounding everything in research, and then we want to see what are the actions that can be taken to actually think about implementing this. And we developed a series of tools for board directors. These include a self-assessment and many other tools, which if you go to the next slide, please, Gordon, you can see to help directors integrate and understand how they can practically do this in their organization. So this resource site includes a series of videos from leading experts around the world, as well as questions for the board to be asking themselves, questions for the board to be asking their management teams, challenging their management teams. And it also includes a COVID-19 response page, which I guess this time last year, as the world moved to working from home and to thinking about how companies were going to respond to this, we interviewed a series of non-executive directors and leading experts, really to understand what is the role of the board in a crisis and how can it support the organization in ensuring that the business is aligned with its purpose and continuing to kind of work towards long-term value, even though it has these short-term crises. And the next slide, please, Gordon. But what is a particularly interesting topic for us at the moment is our current work, which is around stakeholders. As Gordon mentioned, we've seen a real shift in the landscape over the last few years, and particularly we've had the Business Roundtable, the work of the World Economic Forum. There is an increasing focus on this more stakeholder inclusive model. And what we sought to understand with this piece of work is what is the extent to which board directors themselves are having effective and engaging dialogue with stakeholders, with a view that that actually supports the development and adaptation of business models and drives strategic development. By engaging with stakeholders, this can support materiality assessments, as many of the sustainability colleagues on the call will know. And this project, in partnership with DNV, which is one of WBCSD members, was divided into 2 parts. So we conducted a survey. This received over 100 responses. And then we've conducted further interviews to really gain some qualitative and anecdotal input to our research. Next slide, please, Gordon. Our initial findings show that the board is much less likely to be involved in direct engagement with stakeholders, and really management or functional teams tend to have the strongest relationships. When we asked how stakeholder engagement takes place, we see that boards and companies are interacting in different ways and that current practice really varies widely. The next slide, please, Gordon. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, and we see commonly that boards are receiving reports and presentations on key topics from management, that the materiality assessment may be shown to the board as part of that process. But we also see many other ways of engaging that are much more interactive. So perhaps through to two-way engagement, the board is directly engaging with stakeholders through advisory panels, through site visits, through workforce representation committees, all the way through to getting external consultants in to provide that really unfiltered view. And also in the most advanced cases, we're actually seeing those stakeholder engagement activities driving strategy development in the company as well. So ultimately, good stakeholder governance is an operational and strategic imperative, and to effectively discharge their duties, directors need to take account of stakeholders and consider ESG risks when making their decision for the long term. And with that, Gordon, I think I'm done, and I'll hand back to you. But I'd be happy to speak with any of you further on the work we've been doing around governance. So I can put my email in the chat as well.
Elena, thank you very much for your presentation. There is one question for you in the chat from Christian, asking, this is a wonderful systematic approach. Is there a translation into SME, and how do you make the link with the SDGs?
I think this came through, and sorry, I did notice it, but I just wanted to get through my presentation as conscious of time. I think this was in relation to the COSO guidance, and I think, Gordon, you may also want to add anything here, but the guidance is not just designed to be used by large corporates, the principles in there are designed to support all organizations. And even if your organization is actually not following the COSO framework, the application of ESG-related risks is also applicable with other frameworks as well. Gordon, I don't know if you have anything else you want to suggest there, or if you want to move into the game. And Christian, maybe if you have any further questions, we can follow up at the end.
I think so that's right. I mean, the guidance scales up, as Eleanor said. In relation to, I think, the kind of SDG side of things, I think the approach that we would typically see for that would be that you would need to really understand your value creation, your impacts and dependencies, and the purpose of your and strategy of your organization. So what we see in order to be able to then map your processes, your value creation, your capital and risk management to the SDG delivery or attainment. So we see the guidance as providing that clarity of underlying value, process, vision that then would support that mapping of the SDG in a more transparent way. Clearly, the SDGs are end goals, both in terms of our work, but for organizations' commitments to net zero and other initiatives. So absolutely, we would see that the guidance will allow you to implement the processes to ultimately hit these North Stars or move towards these North Stars of the SDGs. Okay. And to answer the question about the communication, yes, we will share these. We will share these with you.
Thank you.
So I'm just sharing. I just changed link. I hope everyone can see that. It's our. So we're just going to play a risk game. I'm really looking for you to be to participate and to stick your hands up and be willing to take on a role and also shout out here. But the game itself, we've adapted this from a physical version of the board game that we actually played at the Shift back in 2019. And it's founded in the guidance of applying the enterprise risk management to ESG-related risks. So it was accompanying tool to that guidance. But the objective is really to explore in a simplistic and hopefully innovative way the experience of some of the challenges of identifying, prioritizing, and mitigating ESG risks. I want to highlight we actually do have an online version of this game, but we would need to allocate multiple URLs, etc. But this is something we can discuss sharing with you if you'd like to experience the online version of the game. But effectively, what the quest is to you as the group today is you are part of the senior management team of Pro Surf and Turf. So Pro Surf and Turf is an integrated fishing, farming, processing and production company for beef, fish and shrimp products. And I say you as a group are the senior management team. However, Pro Surf and Turf have observed that there have been issues within their industry of environmental and social and governance risks that have increasingly been in the spotlight. And indeed, one of your competitors has even been impacted by consumer boycott due to supply chain working practices. And so you've been asked by your board to reassess the company's environmental risks and put in place some appropriate risk mitigation measures. So Pro Surf and Turf, against that requirement, has an overall objective to be the global leader in meat and seafood production, whilst demonstrating continued commitment to sustainable growth and operational excellence. So global leader in production, but a sustainable growth and commitment, excellence commitment. So that's the aspect of the management team. And what we'd like you to do is to go through the process of choosing business objectives, identifying relevant risks, establishing some risk responses, and then we will go through the process of then seeing, based upon the choices you've made, how that's impacting your business performance. But first of all, we need to establish some governance. And that is to assign a couple of roles. Now, you are ultimately the overarching management team, and you're all going to get a chance to vote, but we would really love to have someone who's willing to take on the role of CEO, someone who's willing to take on the role of CFO and someone who'll take on the role of CRO. There's not a huge demand here other than you have ultimate decision on business risks, business objectives, risks, risk responses, and you can provide an opinion, if you like, on which on the perspective as we start the discussion. But that's it. So is anyone willing to be our CEO? Get out your inner manager, inner senior manager. Anyone wanting to take on the role of CEO? All you need to do is to make a decision on what's been voted for, and then we can discuss. Anybody?
Philippe proposed a woman. So is there a woman who just wants to play the role? No. Philippe, you don't want to be the CEO?
Philippe will CFO.
Ah, great.
Philippe, CFO.
Who?
Do you want to be our CEO?
Me?
Yeah, do you mind?
Okay.
Anyone else? And so we need so get a CRO to appoint. Anyone wants to take on that role?